Hello everybody and welcome to Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. I'm Jack and today me and Joe have a bit of a pre-nats pep talk for you. UK Nationals is, as of recording, 3 days away, which has sort of come up really quickly. So me and Joe have been doing so much testing, trying to get a good grip on the meta, trying to work out exactly what we want to play. And we want to share our thoughts with you guys because obviously there's more nationals throughout the world. After UK nationals is usually one of the first, so it'll help give you a bit of an idea, perhaps, how to approach your nationals. And obviously we'll be talking about the different decks you can take. We've split the different decks. I've got them down here. We split them all into three different tiers. All of the different archetypes into three different tiers. So we're going to start at tier 3, go through to tier 1, and spend a bit more time on the more competitive decks that we feel are in the format at the moment. So Joe, if you want to start us off with tier 3.
Yeah, we're going to try and breeze through these fairly quickly to
Yeah.
give the better ones a bit more time. But first one we're going to start off with, it's actually really dropped in popularity because we're going to be talking about Executor first. It has been a very, very dangerous deck, a really annoying lock deck that a lot of decks just can't handle because obviously supporters were, before Roaring Skies, the only real way to draw cards.
Yeah.
Other than, I guess, like Night March decks could run like huge counter acrobike battle compressor and stuff. But for the most part, everyone was using supporters to draw through their decks. The weakness of Executor now is that Shaman is a thing, and that is not a supporter, and it can draw you many, many cards. So everyone is playing, I mean, unless they're countering Shaman themselves in their own deck, in which case they can deal with supporter lock in their own way because they'll run cards like Trainer's Mail, which is another reason why Executor gets worse, because people can find their resources via more trainers that we have, and they have Shaman now. So people can just Ultra Ball into a Shaman to get 3 or 4 more cards, find themselves their energy. Energy Droughting was often a way that Executor could beat people because they would have more access to Crushing Hammers than people would have top decking into energy.
Yeah.
But now with Shaman, if an Executor player misses a Crushing Hammer flip, it can sometimes mean that they just lose the game because that is all the time the opponent needs to actually set up and overcome an Executor deck. So Executor really does lose a lot of power thanks to Shaman.
Yeah. Another big threat that, well, it was the tier 1 archetype for a very, very long time. And 3 months ago, I never thought I would have been saying this, but actually we've put Yveltal in tier 3 as well, which seems still a little bit crazy to me. But basically, with the amount of lightning types that are out there at the moment to counter Mega Rayquaza, and sometimes even Shamans on their own, Yveltal takes a big hit on sort of the forefront of the matchups it has. Even with things like Shadow Circle and sort of techie builds of Yveltal that were designed to beat the Mega Manetric, the Mega Manetric deck that was popular for quite a while around December time, it doesn't really matter because there's so much Stadium War, and even without the Stadium War, there's just so many lightning types out there at the moment that can easily one-shot a Yveltal. The other thing with Yveltal is it can't really one-shot anything anymore itself. There's certain situations where your Yveltal will be able to take 1 or 2 prizes, perhaps from your opponent having no damage on them, but it really struggles to knock out things like Primal EXs, Mega EXs. They've just got so much health, and the Yveltal player often won't be able to deal enough damage in a turn to get rid of a Primal or a Mega anymore. And considering Primals and Megas are quite a big part of the format these days, it's really difficult to justify Yveltal a place in the format anymore. Obviously, it's still a good deck. It's consistent, but unfortunately, with the matchups across the board, it doesn't have as strong of a presence anymore, which is sad. I always like Yveltal, but you know, it's crazy how much one set can change the format, really.
Yeah, it basically just needs to overextend too much now to get its like first couple of prizes. To
Yeah,
kill primals or megas, it has to put like 2 of its DCs straight onto yourself. You've got to have the muscle band. You need to find the laser just to get the knockout, and then if you get respawn KO'd, which is really easy for cards like Rayquaza, they can refresh so easily that then the Yveltal player that next turn has nothing to do.
yeah,
So that's when it sort of gets wiped out. It can still sometimes get those knockouts, but it's just chaining those knockouts.
yeah,
It's a lot harder for Yveltal. Anyway, moving on. another deck that's we thought's dropped down a little bit is Virgin. Virgin has been hanging in there a long time. A lot of people have written it off for a long time. I think Flareon being so good with Archie has been one of the nails in the coffin. Um, and unfortunately, Roaring Skies just brings more bad news for Virgin. Um, so many other decks are just quicker now. Seismitoad, with all of its hammers, thanks to Shaman, gets so much faster, making it more consistent at beating Virgin. Sometimes Virgin players could escape defeat against a Toad player by teching a few DCEs if they get headringered, so that when they do have that turn, when the grass energy stays on, they can win. But
Yeah,
now that there's Shaman, so many people can get into 3-4 hammers in a turn a lot more consistently. So that sort of strategy, just cross your fingers and wait to attack, isn't really viable anymore. And also, again, Speed Rayquaza, we've just mentioned how it affects Yveltal. It's really the same picture. It can attack as quickly as turn one, knocking out a Virizion, and then Virgin has no answers the
yeah.
whole game. And even turn two, with only one Emerald Slash, having one Genesect, G Booster doesn't get a knockout anymore. Pretty poor. Even like Groudon, that you would think is a good matchup, everyone's playing it with Wobbuffet, so you can't even Red Signal to take your prizes that way. So Virgin just has a lot of bad matchups and not many that you would hope to win. I think Donphan's probably the only fairly favourable matchup um, that I can think of. I guess Trevenant's good. Um, but other than that, Virgin is just too slow to keep up with the majority of decks out there.
Yeah.
And if it's able to survive, it's pretty miraculous, to be
Yeah.
honest.
It's such a fast format right at the moment, and that's why a lot of these decks that you would initially consider sort of tier one, tier two, we've had to move them down just because of they can't compete with the speed of some of the new decks. Um, Pretty much just solely because of Shaman. Shaman speeds everything up really, and it really brings up some new archetypes for us. Another deck that we've put in tier three is the sort of fairy variants, using Gardevoir, using Aroma Box. There's all of these sort of fairy variants are again a lot slower now. They struggle to get one hit knockouts as easily. It's not as difficult for them to be one hit knocked out themselves. A big sort of selling point of Gardevoir was that you had this big Mega EX that you just swung for huge amounts of damage every turn, and then healed all the damage off that your opponent did. But now 210 damage isn't even particularly shy for Rayquaza. It can pull it off more than a lot of people think, and more consistently than a lot of people think. So it's meant sort of the Mega Gardevoir builds, whilst they were never hugely successful anyway, they've sort of dropped even lower in popularity just because of how slow they are compared to some of the new archetypes, like we said. And then Fairy Box, just sort of again a really slow deck, as one of the only proper setup decks these days where you have to have your sort of stage ones out to be able to manipulate your energy. Obviously, with something like Fairy, you're gonna have various different attackers to be able to deal with different types of decks. You're gonna have weakness on some. You're gonna have some that just completely shut down decks. But the format is so varied. There's no way you could tech for all of the different archetypes in the format at the moment. There's just not enough room in 60 cards to be able to make a consistent list and a fast list and a list that can tech again have an answer to everything. So we've sort of clumped Fairy all as one and put it down to tier 3. It was sort of tier 2 before Roaring Skies. It was never particularly big on the radar. It had some decent showing at some of the regionals, but it was never huge sort of tier 1. But we have decided to drop it back to tier 3, in our own
Yeah,
opinion at least.
a big decision around that as well is because of hammers. Both Trevenant and Shaman love spamming these hammers now. Two of the most popular archetypes you're going to see. And definitely if it's a Roma box, they cannot keep up with that much just disruption and getting rid of all their energy. Most of Aroma box decks need like 3 energy to attack on all their attackers, unless you tech like a single Landorus. Um, but that's about it, really. And they just can't keep up with that. The trump card situation, allowing people to respam the hammers, is just too deadly for that sort of deck.
Yeah.
So moving on, we've got metals. This is one I've tried to play around with quite a bit. It's a really, the way you would think to play metals, you want to play it like you play an Eels deck of the past. You want to have 3 or 4 Bronzongs, picking up big attackers to get big hits. Unfortunately, we don't have those big attackers in terms of metal, so you have to sort of rearrange how you're going to play the deck. At the moment, I actually play it with like a 3-2 Bronzong count just for every now and then getting an extra attachment, and going down the route of having like an anti-Toad sort of approach where you have a couple of Cabalions, a lot of Steel Shelter, just trying to get rid of all their energy and then slowly grind them into a win, which can work. Aegislash as well, that can counter Rayquaza really, really well. They're not going to have anything in their deck really that can attack without energy, without DCE. They need to find like all 3 of their Mega Turbos and attach them all to a Mega Rayquaza, which is like half of their regular energy count as well most of the time, if not more than half.
Yeah.
So Aegislash can just literally wall that entire deck. So it does have good matchups. It can beat Donphan very nicely as well with Aegislash. You just have to sort of think of it as a rogue deck. You can't play it how you want to play it as an eel build. You need to think of stopping people playing, even though you're not traditionally locking people. You're just throwing things up that are going to cause problems for people, and have Bronzong adding extra attachments to try and counteract the amount of hammers you're going to face.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting build. I don't think seeing as though there's so much versatility in the format, it's risky to go down that route. But if you really want to metagame hard against Seismitoad, and you want to metagame hard against Special Energy in general, which is the majority of the format in fairness,
Yeah.
they're going to be playing DCE or Double Dragon or Strong Energy. These are very, very popular cards. Aegislash can do work there, but you also have to consider Garbodor's still in and around the top tables in some decks. Wobbuffet's big. Silent Lab builds. People are going to play Silent Lab just to try and counter Shaman, and that in turn ruins stuff like Safeguarders and Aegislash. So it is a worry to build your whole deck around that one concept.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to play that sort of build, that's how you have to go about it.
Unfortunately, I still feel Primal Clash has been out for now 3.5, 4 months, and I still feel no one has nailed a perfectly consistent meta list for the. Obviously, the meta's always changing, but I feel because no one's nailed that perfect sort of skeleton list, at least we're still struggling even this far into the format and this far into having access to these big attackers, to find the correct metal list. And maybe someone out there has found a perfect metal list, but unfortunately we don't feel it's the play at the moment, at least. Onto a couple of, before we get into tier 2, we're going to go over a couple of sort of cheaper alternatives that could potentially do really well at Nationals, but we still feel they're sort of overshadowed by tier 1 and 2. But the first of these is Shedinja, obviously the new Roaring Skies card that's just brilliant. It's a really good concept, with sort of using Mew and the Shedinja's, I think it's second attack, to deal 50 damage times the number of counters that are on the Mew. So with a Muscle Band, and then you use things like Frozen City and Rainbow Energy to build your own damage up, you can then deal 170 for just 1 energy. And if you're against the X's, that trades really well, obviously. Unfortunately, Mew EX is on its own a weak EX. It's only got 120 HP. If you're then taking it down by 30, you've got a 90 HP EX Pokemon, which 90 HP is sometimes sort of lacking when it's a stage 1. So when it's an EX giving up 2 prizes, it's obviously a lot more painful. Shedinja, obviously has some good matchups. It can sometimes do really well against Toad if they can build a couple of Shedinjas up without really being hit by the trainer lock that Toad provides. And obviously you need 2 counters on the Shedinja to be able to one-shot a Toad, which seemingly is really good prize trade, but unfortunately in practice and in testing it is not as consistent as one would like it to be, especially under trainer lock. The deck requires a lot of puzzle pieces to be able to come up with a perfect hand. But yeah, Shedinja's definitely a cheaper alternative if you're looking for something. It is a lot of fun to play, so if you're looking for sort of a fun and quirky deck to play, I feel Shedinja is probably one of the best out there at the moment.
Yeah, it really is. And what's so interesting about Shedinja is one of these cheap decks that can actually stand up to Toad if you build your deck, seeing as though its output is via a stadium and rainbow energy. It doesn't actually need the trainers in terms of getting the output up. The issue comes because Toad stops stuff like Ultra Ball, so it stops your access into multiple Shedinja. Normally, you fizzle, unfortunately, with
Yeah.
Shedinja, but sometimes you can just race so far ahead because you have such good typing and just outdo them that way, I guess.
It's
But
a
yeah, it's a fun deck.
it
I
is a
want
fun deck.
I want more people to play that deck.
It's a deck that is has a really simple concept, but I think it's so difficult to master. And again, the list is so crucial because you're going to need a very anti-Toad, sorry, list to be able to,
Yeah, like
um,
fan clubs and all of this stuff to
yeah,
try and maintain yourself over a whole
yeah, to
game.
be able to. Again, it's another thing about being able to stream or have at least one or two Shedinjas, even if you do decide to go down the Mew route when going against Toad, which is highly not recommended. But
Sometimes you have to.
yeah, sometimes you have to. It's all about getting the perfect list and being a very it'd have to be a very anti Toad list for it to be as consistent as you'd want it to be to play it at nationals. I feel, but
The bigger issue for that deck, because it can take on Toad, it can't take on Trevor.
no,
That's the bigger issue for it,
yeah,
because it's just as consistent in trainer locking.
yeah,
Um, but it's even harder for them not to fizzle because they only take single prizes if they're smacking into the active Trevor. So that's the bigger issue for that deck.
the other thing
Uh,
is obviously Trevor also has weakness on the Muse as well, so it's just such an unfair prize trade. You're
the
you're you're
mandatory
really
matchup.
you're really struggling to take out Trevor's, and they're hitting you for like
They
one.
one shot.
Yeah, they one shot you. So not the fairest of prize trades, but if you've got a Toad heavy league challenge or something like that, it's definitely a very very good play, and it's a lot of
Brave
fun.
souls could go for that, I guess.
I can
Anyway,
personally say.
the last of the lower tier stuff that we want to consider is Metacham. It's another good, relatively new budget deck. Um, and in the right circumstances, this deck can do really well. It only needs one energy to get going if you use the Celebi or Shrine of Memories to attack with a Metatite, and it can swing really hard into stuff. Being 90 HP is not fantastic. It does force plays out of Toad players though, because they're capped at 80 with Muscle Band and Laser. It can actually force you into awkward spots when you stay asleep. Um, but for the most part, staying out of range is a good thing. Um, and it's really good against stage ones and Manectric. These are two decks we're going to talk about higher up the list. And because Metacham can hit Raichu for weakness, it can kill that straight away, force them into a new attacker because you can attack twice with Metacham
Yeah.
and either kill another one or force them into a card like a Shaman that they have on the bench and hit that for some damage, but it forces them to have a switching card of which they play few because they're trying to be a turbo list. So Metacham can really do well against stage one decks because it trades really nicely and pretty much outspeeds Raichu, which is rare. Raichu is one of the quickest decks we have,
Yeah,
but Metacham can trade on it really nicely. And it also does really well against Manectric just through natural typing.
yeah,
So it definitely has power behind it. It does struggle against Toad somewhat because the amount of super scoop ups everyone's running in Toad now, the maths isn't that magic anymore. It
yeah,
used to be okay with Metacham to sometimes get two shots, but now it just gets denied too often. So that's the biggest struggle for it. Also, having resistance for Trevenants as well, it makes it awkward for that deck. Seeing as though most of its output is increased by Bangles and Fighting Stadium, it doesn't hit hard through Trevors. Sometimes it two shots Trevors, which is just slow,
yeah,
whereas you're getting hit hard back a lot of the time.
yeah.
But it, like I say, in the right circumstances, it can be a real threat.
Yeah, it's definitely another deck that people will not be expecting. I can guarantee a lot of people will not be thinking, I need to think about Medicham, so you could definitely take some people by surprise as well.
Yeah, and Raichu Leafeon, a lot of people are loving it because it has the obvious synergy of
Yeah,
Toad and Quasar get countered by this.
yeah,
So if you come guns blazing with a Medicham, you're going to win a lot of games.
yeah. Um, so that rounds up tier 3. That's 7 decks, or 7 archetypes that we've put as tier 3. We're going to head into tier 2 now. And the first of these is actually going to be a little pet favorite of mine. It's going to be Landorus, or sort of strong, big basic fighting concepts in general. Sort of things like Lucario, Landorus Lucario, Drifblim, Landorus Lucario, Mewtwo, things like that. Unfortunately, with the amount of Mega Rayquaza around, there is so much on the field that potentially Landorus has resistance. Well, has resistance on Landorus, which means that Landorus's output is that 20 damage doesn't seem like much, but it can really swing a game in the opponent's favour, because the 20 damage can. Some players completely forget about it. Some players don't quite do the math correctly in their head, and it means that sometimes the prizes aren't as fair as Landorus once used to be. Obviously, with things like bats, you do increase the price rate a little bit, but another thing with sort of the megas that we talked about earlier on, the megas have so much HP. Bats are sometimes not as strong as they were when there was a lot of basics about. Because a lot of these setup decks with basics are about you could drop 1 or 2 bats in a turn, and then with the Landorus snipe you could take out sometimes two Pokemon in a turn, or at least a bench sitter. But nowadays there's so many big Pokemon. Even bench sitters are a lot bigger now, because obviously Shaman has 110 HP, meaning that you're going to need at least a Golbat and 3 snipes on it. And even if you go for it like in the active, it's got resistance. So there is so much sort of support-wise that players now use that will mean Landorus snipes aren't as strong anymore, and well, Landorus in general isn't as strong anymore. I feel Landorus Lucario Mewtwo has a little bit more strength just because of Groudon. Mewtwo is a really good counter against Groudon, because it can swing for huge damage just for a DCE. But again, it's another deck that I don't really feel has enough good matchups across the board to justify it a big place, or a place higher than tier 2. Really, it's probably one of the strongest tier 2 decks, but it's not. I don't think it claws itself into tier 1 anymore, which is a shame. But
Yeah,
Landorus
it's one of those. Oh, go on.
Landorus hasn't really been. Landorus has been dropping in popularity as time's gone on. The only real prevalent Landorus build, sort of 2 or 3 months ago, was Landorus Crobat, and even that was in some people's eyes considered a tier 2 deck. So it's been a long time coming for Landorus, but I think Landorus has had its day now, and it's time to see some of the new fighting types sort of deal with the format.
Yeah, it's awkward because Landorus has a lot of toys at its disposal. It has strong energy. It has focus sash, which can help out. Like the way I've tried to build Landorus, because I'm also a lover of Landorus. I think it's inherently a really strong card, hitting for 1 energy for up to like 120 damage. I think it is if you hit an EX and the bench. That's obviously good. And the way I've tried to build Landorus, sometimes I have in mind, okay, I need to worry about Rayquaza, so I throw in a couple of Focus Sash to live, and then try and target, Shamans, add in some Bangles so that you can kill with Horluchas and stuff like that. But basically, you just warp the speed of your own deck, and then if you have to consider worrying about Seismitoad because you have weakness in that matchup, Horlucha's not going to get you the whole way. You've got to go down the route of having maybe a Raichu or a Leafeon. Again, it just dilutes the speed of the deck, and that's something that Landorus just doesn't really fit well with.
Yeah.
You can try and tech like really hard for certain matchups, but at the moment, as we say, so much differentiation going on. The big thing as well is Landorus, like I said, it can hit the 120 or whatever, but a lot of that's hitting into EXs. Horlucha loves hitting into EXs, and Fighting Stadium, that is only boosted for EXs.
Yeah.
And again, Trevenant, big deck that's going to be around. Landorus can't hit into that very well at all, so that's an issue there.
Yeah.
That's why it slipped a bit, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely.
So now we'll talk about Primal Kyogre, one that we've profiled on the channel, one that I've tested a bit as well. It's an interesting deck because it can have the tools to beat Toad. This is one of the tier 2s that I think really does have the power to beat Toad. It also has the power to throw up, almost like Metals, how I was saying, you can throw in cards like Suicune to try and just straight up wall decks, and Suicune really can do that in just a single card in your deck. Enough Rough Seas can make you fairly okay against Seismitoad, especially we have the new Articuno, both of them are helpful. One of them allows you to attach or grab 3 from the deck, put them into the hand so that you have enough accessible to outrun the hammers to
Yeah.
try and start getting attacks off. And the other one can do for 1 energy automatic sleep. And then on that 50-50 chance, if they can't find a super scoop up or if they flip badly on those, you can buy yourself trainers, and then trainers gets you into the rest of your deck. So Kyogre can stand up to Seismitoad. Also, it can stand up to quite a few things. Rayquaza is still an issue for it, but like I say, you're going to try and just go down the Suicune line of play that
Yeah.
way. You just play 1 or 2 of those to try and say, okay, how many techs do you have for Safeguarders in your deck? Do you have the 1-1 Raichu line? Do you have
Yeah.
a 2-2 Raichu line? If you do, fair enough, you probably win.
Yeah.
If you don't play a 2-2, I'm going to kill the first one, and then the second Suicune's going to win me that game.
Yeah.
And Kyogre just having natural bulk is quite nice. It obviously gains Mega Turbo, so it has better speed than we've seen in the past. And just natural bulk is going to keep it out of range of things like Raichu. Trevenant gets outdone thanks to Rough Seas, just like Toad does, to be honest. It has a good Donphan matchup. It has a good Manectric matchup. It stays into a 3-shot, even without the Rough Seas. So the big threat for Kyogre, it's going to be Leafeon.
Yeah.
Because we've said that Groudon is big. We've said that Seismitoad is big. Thus, people are going to be playing Grass Techs, Leafeon being probably one of the best ones. And it is also fantastic at beating Kyogre because Kyogre runs off big energy. All of its techs are normally big energy in terms of actually getting the attacks off. The Keldeo is never going to get a hit in. The Articuno with Delta Plus, if you actually want to attack with that guy, it needs 3 water energy. Or 2 on a colorless, but effectively 3 water. You need the Primal Kyogre to feed your other attackers energy, and obviously Leafeon is just going to have a field day if people play that against you. But like I said, you can build it to be strong against Toad and Quasar, which I think is quite appealing to me personally.
Yeah. It's definitely it definitely causes problems with some of the tier 1 decks, but like Joe said, the Leafeon is going to be so big. It just counters so much. Yeah, and obviously Rayquaza's big as well.
That's an issue as well.
Yeah. Speaking of Rayquaza, we have in tier 2 the Dragon version of Rayquaza. A deck that I feel some people have sort of put under the radar. I feel some people may be testing too much and relying on it too much. I feel it's probably, in my opinion, one of our one of the ones that could be disputed the most because it's a very untested deck and people are still working out the exact way to play it, whether it's with Reshurams and Double Dragons or whether it's with Double Dragons or whether it's a combination of both, depending on, I guess, Toad metas really. But Dragon Rayquaza, and I can say from personal experience, can definitely deal with Toad, which is going to be probably one of the biggest decks that is going to be seen over the next few weeks. Dragon Rayquaza can definitely deal with Toad, especially if it's built well. They are not bothered whatsoever by losing their Double Dragons because a lot of the time they're going to assess that Toad is going to be playing Double Dragon, and they're going to attach basic energy. Obviously, crushing hammers are still an issue, but with Reshiram support, you can get more than 1 energy on in a turn, which can often outpace Toad. And if you can build up a big enough sort of board and a lot of board presence before the Toad can really get the lockdown, if you can get 2 or 3 Rayquazas out and 2 or 3 Reshurams out, you can get a lot of energy on the field at once and sort of overpower the hammers in regards to the Toad player. Obviously, if they do hit their hammers well, Dragon Rayquaza is going to struggle, unfortunately. But there's certainly ways that Dragon Rayquaza can deal with Toad. As far as the other matchups go, things like the normal Rayquaza can deal with Stage 1s and Donphan really well, just because it hits for 130 naturally. I've also seen some people play it with Flight Song, so it can, if you have the Altaria with Flight, I think it's called Flight Song or something like that increases its damage, or it increases Dragon Pokemon's damage. That can deal with EXs on it. That can then deal with EXs on its own, meaning that it can definitely deal with some of the tier 1 threats, but Toad can still be an issue sometimes. Trevenant is a very big issue because they're not. You're only taking 1 prize on doing 300 damage if you've gone down the Mega Rayquaza route, which is sort of an over expenditure of damage, in my opinion, because you're killing the Trevenant twice over before you're even taking a prize, so it doesn't effectively trade very well. But again, they can use the normal Dragon Rayquaza. That I've seen people playing with that. But obviously, that attack in itself, you can't attack with it turn after turn. So a lot of the times, you're just going to be missing turns where your opponent's just going to be able to sort of take free shots at the Dragon Rayquaza. Again, they're going to be running things like Shaman to help them set up quickly. It's an inherently slow deck if it can't get a decent setup. So it's going to be looking for Shamans a lot of the time. And with all the Wobbuffet and Silent Lab at the moment, it makes Shaman a lot more painful for them. Obviously, that also shuts down their Reshirams as well, which is really strong, meaning that their sort of energy, their energy denied in essence, because it means that they can't attach more than one a turn, relying on them to get the double dragon, which is really big. But yeah, Dragon Rayquaza is definitely something you need to look out for and probably test 2 or 3 games against just to assess how to beat the deck. I don't feel it's going to win Nationals. I don't feel it's got enough power to win Nationals. Again, it's a listing. I don't feel anyone will have found the perfect list to deal with absolutely everything in the format at the moment. But there are certain matchups that Dragon Rayquaza can do really well, and certain matchups that Dragon Rayquaza can not do as well with.
I think Groudon just brings it down to its level in terms of speed.
Yeah.
And then obviously Groudon's going to play Focus Sash and Scramble, so it will beat the Quasar deck most of the time.
Yeah.
I guess when the Groudon's active, it does allow your opponent, the Dragon Quasar player, to have abilities again.
Yeah.
But just slowing them down that much is going to make it a difficult matchup for the Dragon Quasar player. And I think Groudon's going to be, one of the top 4 decks.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be big.
To see. So that's a hurdle for Dragon Quasar.
Yeah.
Trevenant as well. If you want to tech against Trevenant, you can play a single Flygon.
That's something.
Point thing.
Yeah, that's something I hadn't thought about. That's interesting.
That's fun.
But again, if they have
you
two,
can free retreat out with abilities.
But again, if they have 2 Trevenant out, that's
don't
yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the other dragon deck that we get thanks to Roaring Skies. At least a new Breath of Life, because there's a Plasma Freeze Latios. I'm talking about Latios now. That can actually hit 150 damage. I think it's Luster Purge, discarding everything attached to it.
Yeah.
And that's a double dragon and then a Reshiram attachment if you use that route. So you can do it in a turn. You can hit 170. You can play Laser Bank to put that up to 200 if you really want to in a turn, making it a real donk aspect deck. That is obviously a threat to a lot of things out there. Yeah, a lot of people just can't run with that sort of thing. You just start off with Reshiram, you get a Hydreigon, you attach, and then go. It's really, really strong in that aspect. And then there's the other aspect that you have the Mega, if you want to play that. So the way I like to see Latios, how you're going to play it, you're mainly going to go for 2 big knockouts with a Latios. Like I say, you attach the Double Dragon, a Fire Energy, knock out and discard all your energy twice over. And then you want to look for the cheap prize, because at this point, you probably only have 1 or 2 Double Dragons left in deck. You're looking for endgame at this point, and if you're up against things like non-EXs, it gets a lot more difficult for you, a lot more awkward. So this is where you want to play the Mega. I see a lot of people not playing the Mega in the Latios deck. Either people play the Mega Latios and they're trying to spam stuff like Target Whistle to kill many, or at least they play Bats to just snipe all the time.
Yeah.
Or they play the other build trying to donk every time. I actually like a bit of a combination of the two, having like a one count of the Spirit Link and the Mega, so that you can finish off your game a lot easier. You can just target Shaman for game and just close the book on that whole affair. Because stuff like Trev Shaman, it is so difficult for you to stay into that game, because you have to hit the face 6 times on Trevors, or at least, get your Lysanders at the right times.
Yeah.
Which is really difficult, seeing as though you're going to get hammered every turn as well. So you can't just sit around with energy on you, hoping to draw into Lysander at some point. So that's where the Mega comes really helpful. Also, it's a buffer of HP, which is nice a lot of the time, just staying out of range of things. The speed of Latios is undeniable. It's like a quicker version of Dragon Quasar, I guess.
Yeah.
Dragon Quaz is obviously a bigger hitter. The matchups are slightly different because
Yeah,
that's also a tankier style deck. But having this snipe can really help you close up games, which I think people aren't taking advantage of enough.
yeah,
So it's one to look into if you're thinking of running some tier 2 stuff or if you're a fan of Latios.
yeah. The other thing, obviously with Latios, I've from personal experience, Latios, a Latios can be completely shut down by a Headringer, and there's at least two big decks that play Headringer at the moment. And whilst a lot of attackers, if they get Headringered, they don't mind attaching an extra energy to be able to still attack. Things like Manetric doesn't mind as much being Headringered because they're running only basics. Um, with Latios, you then can't set it up in a turn. You then can't Spirit Link it. It can sometimes just mean there's a dead Latios on your board that you just can't deal with.
That's a really good point as well because it struggles more than most because unlike a lot of decks, the draw support all comes no the energy attachments and all that stuff comes through trainers
Yeah,
comes through Pokemon. Sorry, so your Ultra Balls are so valuable in your Latios game.
yeah,
If your Latios does get headringered, you're spending that Ultra Ball to find a new Latios
yeah,
instead of finding your Hydreigon piece or another Reshiram that you need to attach.
yeah.
That is what's really dangerous for Latios. So that's a great point actually.
And then the last deck to round off tier two, is another sort of cheap alternative. It's going to be Night March. A lot of people think that Night March gets better with Rayquaza. Well, the format including including Roaring Skies. And in some aspects that's correct. Obviously, Joltix can eat at Rayquazas for days on days on days. Um, and you get things like Trainer's Mail that increases the momentum of the deck so quickly. But in getting more trainer draw, you're putting yourself even more vulnerable to Toad and Trevenant. And again, they're just too much of a presence to be able to justify a good. Well, it might not much being a good play at the moment because there is trainer lock absolutely everywhere, and the deck runs pretty much solely off of getting a good turn two or good turn one really, but a few good turns of being able to use their trainers. Battle compressors obviously are huge, and if you can't get access to them turn one, then that unfortunately loses you the game because if you're locked out of them, then there's no way at all for you to be able to discard your Night Marchers into the discard. But it obviously it gains some momentum with Rayquaza. Um, Again, it's one of the only megas that it can actually knock out in one hit. And then there's also Revivers just was reprinted in Roaring Sky, so that comes back into the format. So you can definitely feel better about discarding all but one of your Night Marchers, especially if you're running Revive, because you can just revive one back onto the bench. So in essence, you can always have 220 damage in the discard ready to go. And even if that last Night Marcher gets sniped or anything like that, you can revive it next turn to be able to just carry on hitting hard. But again, it's another trainer, and if you just don't have access to these trainers a lot of the time anymore. Obviously, especially with Toad and Trevenant about the Rayquaza matchups a lot stronger. I feel it's always struggled with Donphan just because they can easily swing and kill your Mew EXs in one hit. It's not even difficult for a Donphan to one shot a Mew EX. It can sometimes be difficult for them to one shot a big EX, but Mew is just so fragile in itself. They're going to be taking prizes so much faster than you, especially as they also run robo substitutes as well. So it increases the Rayquaza matchup's really good for it, especially if you can stream Joltix because you only need I think it's 5 or 6 Night Marchers in the discard, providing they haven't got Altaria out to be able to one shot a Mega Rayquaza, which is so strong. This little baby spider is one shotting this huge dragon. But unfortunately, as good as that matchup is, the amount of matchups where you're not going to have any trainers is going to be so detrimental to you. You're probably going to lose as many games as you are going to win just solely against Rayquaza, which is really unfortunate because I have a soft spot for Night March. I really like Night March, but it's unfortunately not right at the moment just because of how much trainer lock there is, which is a shame.
Yeah, it gains a lot in terms of revive helps so that you can actually extend enough to kill megas. You can go to that 220, put a muscle band on to kill anything. and Trainer's Mail, it's such a strong trainer card. I really love that. A lot of people are using that as the consistency booster now.
Yeah,
A lot of people see it stronger than bike, stronger than roller skates, all of those things. I think Trainer's Mail is pretty superior than all of those.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
really good for Night March for finding a double compressor battle compressor turn or a triple battle compressor turn. So you can definitely extend really quickly on your first turn. Um, but Train Lock just too big right now. And also like playing like the Tech Virizion and a few Grass Energy, it works better for Toad than it does against Trevenant. Um, Emerald Slash isn't good against Trevor. You three shot with Emerald Slash, it's still not good. You conserve like damage in terms of you're not getting lasered anymore on your Mews and stuff. But Trevenant's again hitting for weakness for one hit knockouts on the Mew regardless. So the Virizion tech that would work for some Toad matchups, at least try and make it sort of recoverable. You can't do that against Trevor, unfortunately.
No.
So Night March really does lose hard to Trevenant matchups.
Yeah, so that pretty much rounds up tier two. I'm gonna go and get another drink, and we're gonna be back in a second with tier one. We're gonna go over the decks in a little bit more depth. We're gonna go over some of the variants. Obviously, these are just archetypes. There's so many different ways you could play all of these cards. But yeah, so bear with us, and we will be back momentarily.